We can use this style attribute to set the inline style of an HTML element, such as a div right here, line number 8. The value of the style attribute must be an object, like we just discussed in the last video. What we can set here is actually very similar to CSS, except that the format is different. For width and height, we can just put a number, just as we can put it here, like 120. It means the px unit in CSS. But if we want to use other units, like, not this 120, we want to use EM unit. So we get an error, invalid number. So this is not a number, this is not a valid number in JavaScript, or actually anything valid in JavaScript. In this case, we will have to just quote it around to make a string, so that React will recognize it as its like EM value over here. You see on the right, it's working now. If we convert this object into its corresponding CSS, it's gonna be something like it's gonna be like this without this curly bracket, and without the quotes, you can directly write EM, and this comma, we need to replace it with a semicolon because that's the syntax in CSS. And 120, we need to add it like the unit, the px, and the background, we do not need to quote it. So that's what we would write it if we are actually writing it in CSS. For CSS rules that have multiple words in the name, for example, let's say this border radius, we usually write it this way, right? Border radius, 30 pixel. This is not gonna work if we actually put it inside, like that. And we'll get another error. That's because this dash is not supposed to be a valid name in JavaScript. But here we're actually trying to use it as the name of the property inside this object. So to fix that, we need to convert it to camel case. Remember the camel case? So instead of this dash, make a capital letter radius. And now it actually works. You see the border radius. Under the hood, all property of like this style object actually get converted to CSS if we inspect it. And we're gonna see over here this style, it's gonna have this CSS inline style right inside this div element, right? But since we're writing JavaScript code here in the editor, we will have to follow the rules of JavaScript. Again, this dash cannot be a name of a property. If we just write it this way, it'll report an error. We will have to convert it to camel case. And if a value is not a number, we would have to add quotes around it to make it a string. So that's why we need to have this inside this JSS code, unlike what we can write in CSS. All right, we've seen two ways to style a frame. The first way is this style attribute, right? And the second way is the one, we have this height or border radius or the width that we had it before. Both set the inline style of the resulting div. These attributes, this height or border radius, they work because under the hood frame convert them into the style attribute. And it also merge the actual style attributes that we specify on the frame tag. And eventually the style attributes get converted, into the CSS that we see in the browser. Not to confuse you, but there is a third way to style things in React code. You see this class name, line number 9, right? And it is equivalent to class in HTML. And this, import style .css. We can actually edit the styles.css file to style the div here. Let me try. So here we have this import. And if we go over to the file system over here, there is a file called styles.css. We can actually, add some style rules over there. For example, background color. Let's use it like a pale green, and go back to comment out this one. Just get rid of it in line number 10, and then we get a green background for the div, right? So if you look back on this styles.css file, now we're actually writing the real CSS rules, and we would have to follow the format of CSS files. And this color box is actually added by the editor. I didn't have to type type that in just in case if you're curious, but you can just type in the color name here. It'll automatically add this square. Because it's a CSS file, we didn't have to put a quote around it. Actually, if I put it there, and it'll be broken, right? I know this can be error prone if we have to switch back and forth between different ways of writing the style. One way I found useful is to check the extension of the file that we are actually working on right now. This guy is a styles.css file. And whereas when we're actually working on this JS file, that we actually need to follow the format requirement of the JavaScript code. So basically quote everything that's supposed to be quote, and camel case instead of a dash. But remember, CSS is a final destination. The style attribute will be eventually converted to CSS. And the attributes on frames such as width, height, and border radius, like you see over here, they are just shortcuts to set the style attribute, and these shortcuts only work for framer-specific tags.